Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video we got even more class updates for Shadowlands coming up this Tuesday, Wednesday reset. So this isn't a final list, and maybe Blizzard will add more classes and more updates. We'll probably cover this again Tuesday once this comes out, if there are any notable other changes. Blizzard is going to be buffing not only classes but also a feature with Tourgas, and that's another thing we'll be talking about today. A bunch of different catch-ups for anything that's been feeling lacking, I guess is going to be the theme of this video. Now these are not some crazy buffs. This is just going to be simple buffs that are, I don't think are going to be super meta changing, but we will dive very closely into what I mean when it comes to the, not sims, but rather class representation inside of Castle Nathria, as I think all these changes are going to be good for anybody playing these specs, as a variety of them are getting buffed, but don't expect anything super crazy out of it. First change we could talk about is the one that has to do with Tourgas. In Tourgas, as your main, you might be able to jump into layer 8 of any hallway that's available for the week just to grind your soul ash. 2 layer 8s and you're good to go. But if you try to level any new characters like I did with my hunter, you find out that once you unlock Tourgas on the hunter, you'd never done a layer 8 on that hunter, even though you feel like you've done enough Tourgas to be able to run an undergeared character through a layer 8, the game still has you grind through layer 1, then layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, layer 5, all the way to layer 8, so you can unlock the most amount of soul ash. And with someone trying to get a bunch of ults and get your legendaries, that takes quite a bit of time. So Blizzard is going to allow, if your main has done a layer 8 Tourgas, your ults, starting now, will be able to, and this should be hotfixed as of right now in the game, if your main has done a layer 8 this week, then your ults that are undergeared, that are just unlocked Tourgas, never done a layer 8, will also be able to do layer 8s for the weekly caps. Making that grind much quicker, especially if you got some friends that want to help you out, or maybe you got some guildies, or you jump into the pug groups, or you simply just want to solo it because rogues, for example, they need a little bit of gear before they can do Tourgas just fine. But on my hunter, I had a breeze with low item level, so going for my future ults that have so much crazier powers than my rogue, I think it's just going to make it that much easier for me to dive in on my ults that have no gear and clear Tourgas layer 8s for the weekly cap much quicker. This is a massive upgrade. Next, I want to take a look at the class buffs, and first of all, let's take a look at this graph right here. This graph shows right now how classes are performing in Castle Nathria on Mythics. It's probably a good idea to remember that Mythic level content is some high level content, and not every single class is designed to be able to do Mythics regularly, or at least if you're trying to go for like top 100 guilds. I believe eventually every single class and every single spec in the game will see the Nathria's Mythic slain at some point or another, whether it takes a long time, whether it takes a short time, but every single class and spec I think is viable for it, but the ones that have the most amount of advantage will always be picked by most guilds and groups, making us the meta. I don't think Blizzard is trying to make all these buffs meta changing, as there are small buffs to make certain classes perform a little bit better if that is your personal choice of playstyle within Castle Nathria or other PvE/PvP content. Some players believe that when Blizzard buffs a class, especially if it's the one they play, it should go from middle of the pack or bottom of the pack all the way to the top, which I don't think, again, Blizzard is trying to change the meta, and I don't think this is going to be happening until maybe a new tier season. So while we're until Castle Nathria, I think they're just trying to shore up specs and classes that are not performing as well as the counterparts. So don't expect anything crazy out of these changes, but let's still take a look at what are the buffs and how impactful they might be for either right now for the classes or going forward. My favorite spec of Death Knight got buffed with a 5% buff. I don't think this is going to make Frost overtake Unholy by any measure, but those that play Frost right now will see a nice increase. The playstyle of the 2-hand Frost Death Knight in particular is going to receive the most benefit out of this buff, since less of your damage is going to be from simple auto attacks, and more of your damage is out of those Obliterates, Frost Strikes, and every other Frosty ability in your toolkit. While not a massive buff, and I don't think Frost is going to overtake Unholy, but it is a nice buff to a favorite spec of mine. Havoc Demon Hunters are seeing a 3% damage buff. I know, not the biggest damage buff out there, and I think this might be one of the first few buffs for Demon Hunters. I believe they might have had either a 3% or a 5% buff in the past, so this together would be overall anywhere between 6% to an 8% buff overall. I don't think this is going to be enough to make Demon Hunters all of a sudden insane, but I feel like Demon Hunters, Havoc in particular, are just not really all that bad. I don't think their damage is top tier, and they're not pulling any numbers Fire Mages are, but not a lot of classes are either. I think Mages is still going to be a lot stronger and preferred in groups. My favorite spec of Hunter with Survival as well as Beastmaster also received a tuning with 5% buff. I believe this might be one of the first few tunings that Beast Mastery and Survival are seeing, although maybe there might have been a Beastmaster buff in the past that I just don't remember. This is quite significant since those two specs are actually at the bottom of the barrel right now for Castle Nathria Mythic. And while they're not the most popular specs, since, you know, Marksman being ranged is a lot better, so Survival loses out on that since there's so many melee spots, and Beastmaster simply just does less damage than Marksman right now, so people are going to play Marksman. This is going to be a nice buff for those that want to play BM and MM. For Survival right now, the struggle that they have for single target I think is going to be alleviated in the future with better gear and a lot more haste. For Beast Mastery, I'm not really sure exactly what they need in order to be stronger in terms of PvE content, but maybe again it's one of those things where scaling in gear is going to eventually make them far better. So we will have to wait and see how hunters are performing, but seeing this buff right now should make a lot of you guys excited, especially for better gear going into the future tiers. Frost Mages also got a buff of overall 3% extra. Doesn't seem like a lot, but you should remember the Frost Mages actually got about like an 8 or a 9% buff last patch, so together a 9% buff plus 3% together makes a 12% buff, which seems quite sizable, at least compared to a measly 3% by itself. I kind of try to tag all these buffs together because they really do add on, and Frost Mages, even though they got a buff last time, we're still not seeing enough of them. But there are people that play Frost, and Frost can actually put out quite a bit of damage in dungeons, and especially in cleave situations. It's actually their specialty. So I wonder with this 9% plus 3% on top of that, if that might be enough for some Frost Mages to shine in Mythic Pluses and really push some rating, and maybe we'll see more Frost Mages since I feel like that's the most accessible spec, particularly for new players. We also got quite an interesting buff to Assassination Rogues. And because I'm someone who plays Rogue all the time and I'm part of the Rogue Discord, we have some extra information on that setup. It looks like this buff is actually quite big. We're looking at a 5% buff, but previously there was a 13% buff to Assassination with previous patches, together making an 18% overall buff to all your abilities, which is quite huge. In early sims right now against Subtlety, where Subtlety is in pure single target with Akari So Legendary, which nobody really ever runs because most people run Finality, Subtlety is only slightly ahead, about 2.28% ahead of Assassination. But since nobody runs Akari Cell, it does mean that Assassination and Subtlety are actually pretty neck to neck in single target. If it's a single target situation with a lot of burst situational moments, Subtlety will still be ahead, but if you're someone who actually wants to play Assassination and you want to do some raiding, you might actually have some viable DPS, at least DPS that's comparable to Subtlety Rogue in pure single target. In Cleave, I think still Outlaw is going to be good, but if someone wants to play Assassination with some of the AoE legendaries or bleed-based setup with AoE and Mythic Pluses, I think it might be more possible. I actually cannot wait to test some of the damage that it puts out in my next Mythic Plus next time I get a chance at it. Enhancement Shaman's got an odd 3% buff to all their abilities, which is actually quite significant since most of their attacks are actually ability-based, like Wind Fury and such. So this is a nice buff, but it's a small buff. I don't think this will be enough to impact any Shamans play in the game right now, but I heard a rumor that potentially Enhancement Shamans and Feral Druids are looking like really strong melee potentially going forward since we'll be getting more gear, and those guys apparently are weighted so heavily with gear in terms of how well they perform, we might be seeing Enhancement Shamans on the rise going forward in future raids. Destro Warlock saw a 5% buff, and I wonder if we'll see more destruction in the future as we get in towards the end of some soul binds. I've heard a build potentially of Demonology / Destro as a Necrolord, and I wonder with this buff if it might be a possibility, or if Destro might be viable enough, at least Mythic Pluses, because it does have a pretty big affinity for AoE, where I feel like it could be pretty good in. Finally, we're seeing a Warrior buff for 3% for both Arms as well as Fury. Now, 3% doesn't seem like a lot, but Fury, like Assassination, got buffed by 13% from the last two builds, and now with this 13%, it's looking like a 16% overall buff. I think this is going to be quite good for Fury Warriors, and for Arms, it simply is just keeping them afloat, as it doesn't look like gear and get a better gear right now isn't allowing them to scale super crazy, at least not at the moment. We might need some real heavy-duty item levels towards the very end game of the content before we see those two specs really take off. But this is a nice buff for the two Warrior specs, whichever one you end up playing, it's actually quite a nice adjustment. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know if you think Blizzard should do more, or should we all just be patient and see what they end up doing for the next raid tier, because I know that's definitely going to be very exciting. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see all of you in the next one.